Hey, good afternoon. Bob here. Wanted to discuss briefly guitar necks, okay? Uh, Cedar versus mahogany, mainly. You could also enter maple into the mix, and you could enter rosewood into the mix for a neck. But today we're going to just briefly talk about the difference between a cedar neck and a mahogany neck, and what I use through the years, why I use what I use. And so let's start off just between cedar and mahogany, because that's really all I want to talk about today. I prefer mahogany. And why do I prefer mahogany? I prefer mahogany because it's a little denser. I believe it has more sustain than cedar. I also prefer mahogany because when people use capos on the guitar neck, mahogany is a tougher wood than Spanish cedar. So for those reasons mainly, I prefer mahogany. I don't have any mahogany here to show you because I sold all of my guitar wood about 3 months ago in an effort to get me to retire. However, I did keep one cedar neck, which I have right here. It's a pretty nice neck, fairly well quartered. And I kept the cedar neck mainly because I can always get mahogany a little bit easier than I can get cedar. So in case I want to make another guitar with a mahogany neck, I can get it fairly easily. So I kept one cedar neck, and when I sold all of my wood, I sold whatever I had neck-wise, mahogany and cedar. Most of it went to the guy that bought my wood. Okay, let's talk about cedar, because I use both. Although I prefer mahogany, I use both. Why do I use cedar, and when do I use cedar? Cedar is a little bit lighter in weight, and if I'm making a lightweight guitar like a flamenco or a lightweight classical, I will almost always use a cedar neck if I want to reduce the weight. It's not substantial, it's a slight difference in weight. And like both species, you can have heavier cedar and lighter cedar weight-wise. You can also have heavier mahogany and lighter mahogany. Really varies. I used to get the stuff in. Some stuff would be heavier than the other, and I would sort through that and mark it as such. So I will use cedar when I want a lighter guitar. What are some of the other advantages of cedar? Cedar is easier to carve. It's very simple to work with. It carves beautifully. It planes beautifully. And of course it smells great. Those are my advantages to cedar. Now let's go. Remember, we're not including maple or rosewood or other species of necks. This little talk is just about the wood I use, cedar or mahogany. I use them both, or I have used them both throughout my career. Let's talk about truss rods. I don't use truss rods. I learned from the great Manuel Velasquez, who did not use truss rods Okay, I'm going to keep going. Manuel did not use truss rods. Herman Hauser didn't use truss rods. Ignacio Fleta didn't use truss rods. Truss rods really, in the old days, truss rods were not considered anything that a classical guitar needed. Since the string pull on a classical guitar is between 80 and 90 pounds of tension, of pull, whereas compared to a steel string, it's like 160 pounds of tension. So you really need something in a steel string guitar, and generally a steel rod. It can be adjustable or it cannot be adjustable. That's another topic. You can have a truss rod that's adjustable or a truss rod that's not adjustable. So anyway, when I started making guitars, I started putting an ebony strip down the middle. I would cut the neck in half down the middle. I would take a piece of ebony about 1/4 of an inch to 5/16 wide, and I would glue it in between, make the sandwich, glue it up, and just like Jose Ramirez III did. There are some other builders that use not truss rods, but stiffening inserts, like I think Fleta used them at some point. Kono used them. Kono actually used 2 of them. My feeling was always, as long as you've got well-quartered wood, this wood here is fairly well-quartered. I'm not sure what I did with my pencil, but this is a little bit off-quarter. I'd prefer it to be better than that, but that's what I was sent, and I use it. So I'm not opposed to inserts, carbon fiber or ebony or maple. I remember at one time Robert Ruck used to put maple down the middle, and then at some time later in his career he started to use truss rods, as did Greg Smallman, Jim Redgate, some other builders, and started using truss rods. So perhaps if I continued to build for another 10 years, I might do some experiments with truss rods, adjustable or non-adjustable. I mean, it seems to me if you're going to put a truss rod in, you ought to make it adjustable, you know. I've never had a problem with my necks coming up. I'm not saying that it won't happen 20 years from now, but I've never had a problem. Plus, I use a thicker fingerboard. My fingerboards are generally 7 millimeters thick. That's where I start. So anyway, yeah, I wish I could show you a demo. I do cut for classical guitars, I cut a 10-degree scarf joint. And if I make a flamenco guitar, I'll cut at least a 15-degree. If I'm using pegs versus tuning machines, if I'm using pegs, I'll change the angle to 15, maybe even more. But 15 is enough of an angle, 15 degrees. You could go to 20. Because the strings are coming off the nut and not going down into the slots on the tuning machines, because if you're putting pegs in on a flamenco guitar, they're going over the nut and then they're just going slightly down to the tips of the wooden pegs, or perhaps they're pegs with planetary gears, but still the angle of the string break is much shallower when you use pegs versus tuning machines. Okay, one other thing I do, I learned this from Velasquez. Almost always I don't use a stacked heel. I use a 3x4x6 block like this, and I cut it down the middle on my bandsaw, and then I take one half and I flip it around. I plane it on my jointer, and then I glue it back together. And that way, I end up with sort of a V grain, because usually the grain is at an angle or something. So by cutting it in half, cleaning up the surfaces, flipping it around, gluing it back together, and then I always have a center line to carve to as well. It's the glue joint. Just something I learned from Manuel Velasquez. You don't have to do that, but typically I'll use a block like this. This smells so nice, being cedar. Okay, so like I said, a short video just talking about cedar versus mahogany and why mahogany is harder, so it damages, it's much more difficult to get to ding it with a capo or whatever. It is, mahogany neck has, in my opinion, more sustain. Also, another thing I want to talk about real quick. When I carve my neck block, I generally have a fairly large shelf on the inside of the guitar. I am not one of these people to only leave 3/4 of an inch of foot on the inside. I leave a rather hefty amount of wood inside the guitar, and that's really for sustain. And I've done my foot design has changed over the years, but it's always pretty hefty. And I do that because I believe more wood equals more sustain. Sort of like a bass guitar, an electric bass, where you have a big, heavy, solid body and a big, long neck. You know, it's a massively heavy thing, and it sustains forever. So I like my necks to be, I hide it inside. I like there to be more wood inside than really has to be, but I do it for the sustain. Okay, and the actual shape of my foot inside has changed through the years. So I won't go into all that, but I just thought I would let you know about that. When I get to carving the necks on these new guitars, I will videotape that to show you my process. But wrapping it up, cedar, lighter weight, easy to carve. It's strong. It's a strong neck. It's strong wood, especially if it's quarter cut. And this is pretty good, not great. Also, this is at an angle. This grain line is at an angle. I don't like that much either, but it is what it is. The great and late Robert Ruck used to tell me that he accepts his wood pile for what it is. He doesn't judge every piece of wood, and because the wood is not responsible for the way it turned out. He used his wood pile and he accepted what he had, and I do the same thing. And now I'm down to one neck. Okay, I have enough wood to build one more guitar. I may or may not do that. This is some Brazilian rosewood just to show you, you know, a head stock. But when I did sell all my wood, I actually sold all my head plates, and sometimes I take it out of the back, and so on. Yeah, so I use mahogany more than cedar. Cedar's easier to carve, it's lighter weight, it smells great when you sniff inside of a guitar. Mahogany is got better sustain, it marks less, it's proven. Manuel Velasquez used mahogany, Herman Hauser used mahogany. Then again, the great Robert Ruck preferred cedar. So, I mean, it's something you have to come to terms yourself on. I suppose you could make a hybrid neck and make it half cedar and half mahogany. I mean, anything's possible. But I personally prefer mahogany, although I do love cedar. I love the look of it. I love the smell of it. It's really easy to carve and work. And I do not use a truss rod, nor do I use a reinforcement strip. I rely on the wood itself and a thicker fingerboard. I don't really see a great advantage to putting a piece of ebony down the middle. You know, if you use it on edge, of course, it's pretty strong that way. But I do want to say one thing. I'm not opposed to it, okay? I'm not opposed to putting carbon fiber down the middle or maple or ebony. I'm not opposed to it. And I'm not opposed to truss rods either. They are going to add weight. They will add, I'm guessing they're going to add sustain, because in a steel string, I have a couple of steel strings, and you do get quite a lot of sustain when you throw a bar of metal in there, adjustable or not adjustable. Of course, on a steel string, they're adjustable. They're almost always adjustable. So that's it. Just going to wrap this up. I can't think of anything at the moment between mahogany and cedar. I think it's a personal choice. I use both. I do like them both. But if I could only use one, it would be mahogany. Okay, Bob Desmond checking out. Happy Saturday. It is Saturday. It's the 2nd of August, 2025. Take care now.